Welcome to tonight's story. I'm super excited about this one because I've actually been to Grovely Woods and I've actually seen the famous tree, and it is absolutely spellbinding, so I hope you enjoy this one. There is an old saying in Wiltshire that some forests remember, not in the way people remember, but in quieter ways, in the roots that grow deeper with every passing century, in the branches that have watched generations come and go, and in the silence that lingers long after everyone else has gone home. Just a few miles from the cathedral city of Salisbury, hidden beyond narrow country lanes and rolling farmland, lies Grovely Wood. To most people, it's simply a beautiful woodland, a place to walk the dog, to watch bluebells bloom in spring, to escape the noise of everyday life. But if you wander far enough away from the well-used paths, you'll eventually come across something unexpected: an enormous ancient beech tree, its trunks twisted with age, its roots rising from the earth like withered hands, and hanging from its branches hundreds of ribbons: red ribbons, white ribbons, purple ribbons, some so faded they've almost become part of the bark itself. Others are bright and new, as though tied only yesterday. Nobody tells visitors to leave them. There's no sign asking for offerings, and yet every year more ribbons appear. Some people leave flowers, others leave crystals, coins, tiny handwritten notes folded carefully beneath the roots. When asked why, most simply smile. Some refuse to answer. Others quietly say, "They're for the sisters." The sisters, 4 women whose names have almost disappeared from history. 4 women who, according to local legend, were never witches at all. The story begins hundreds of years ago, when Grovely Wood looked much as it does today. The trees were younger, but no less magnificent. Their branches stretched across the sky like the roof of a great cathedral. Sunlight danced across the woodland floor. Streams trickled quietly between carpets of moss. Wildflowers bloomed wherever they pleased, and on the edge of the forest stood a small cottage. It wasn't grand, just a simple timber home with a thatched roof and a little herb garden outside. Lavender swayed gently in the breeze. Rosemary climbed along the fence. Bundles of drying herbs hung beneath the porch roof. It was here that 4 sisters lived together. No one remembers what they were really called. The old stories lost those names long ago. So today we'll simply think of them as 4 sisters, bound not only by blood, but by kindness. The eldest carried herself with great confidence. She rarely raised her voice. If a neighbor needed help, she was the first to arrive. The second sister laughed easily. She could brighten even the darkest day with a single smile. The third loved the woodland more than anywhere else. She knew where every wildflower bloomed, where berries could be eaten, where plants could soothe a fever, and which should never be touched. The youngest, barely more than a young woman, had a habit of filling every room with conversation. She sang while collecting herbs. She laughed at her own jokes. She believed everyone deserved a second chance. Together they lived a peaceful life. Every morning they wandered into Grovely Wood carrying woven baskets. The forest provided much of what they needed: chamomile, yarrow, elderflower, mint, wild garlic, plants that generations before them had used to ease pain, calm troubled stomachs, or help someone sleep through the night. In those days, there were no chemists, no hospitals. Knowledge of the natural world was precious. The sisters never claimed magic, only patience, experience, and respect for the woodland that surrounded them. Their cottage was rarely closed. Door was always open. Travelers stopped for fresh water. Children arrived with scraped knees. Older villagers sought remedies for aching joints or winter coughs. Sometimes the sisters accepted a loaf of bread in return, sometimes eggs, sometimes nothing at all. Helping others was just simply part of who they were. On warm summer evenings, the four sisters would sit beneath the old beech tree at the edge of the forest, sharing bread, pouring tea, watching the sunlight disappear through the branches. The youngest would often ask, "Do you think this tree will still be here when we're old?" The oldest would smile. "It was old long before we were even born." The others laughed. "It'll probably outlive us all." None of them realized how true those words would become. Because while peace filled the woodland, something else was slowly making its way towards the village. At first, it seemed unimportant. A farmer's wife became ill, then a stable boy. A few days later, an elderly man who had always seemed strong enough to outlive everyone. People spoke quietly about it. "It's probably just the cold weather. It'll pass. It always does." But it didn't. Within weeks, more cottages kept their doors closed. Church bells rang more often than usual, not for weddings, but for funerals. The sisters continued to help where they could, preparing herbal teas, cooling cloths, simple remedies that had comforted countless people before. Sometimes they helped, sometimes they didn't, and little by little, the smiles that once greeted them began to disappear. Neighbours who had once waved now watched silently from behind half-closed doors. Conversations stopped whenever the sisters approached. The youngest noticed it first. "Why is everyone staring at us?" No one answered, but everywhere became very quiet. The first whisper had already begun. At first, the whispers were easy to ignore. The sisters told themselves people were frightened. Illness has a way of changing even the kindest hearts. Every morning, they continued gathering their herbs. Every afternoon, they visited those who had asked for help. And every evening, they returned home carrying fewer smiles than the day before. One morning, as the younger sister crossed the village square, she noticed two women standing beside the old stone wall. They stopped talking the moment they saw her. One looked. The other tightened her shawl across her shoulders, as though standing too close might somehow make her ill. The youngest lowered her eyes and continued walking. She tried to convince herself it meant nothing, but deep inside, something no longer felt right. That evening, the four sisters sat around their wooden table. A loaf of bread rested between them. A pot of herbal tea steamed gently in the center. Normally, the younger sister would have filled the room with stories. Instead, she stared into her cup. "They're afraid of us." Silence settled over the cottage. Finally, the oldest sister sighed. "They're afraid of the sickness." "No," the youngest whispered. They're afraid of us. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, none of them knew how to answer. The days that followed became quieter. People stopped knocking on their door. Children who once waved now hurried past without looking. The village seemed to have built an invisible wall around them. Then the rumours began. They spend all day in the forest. They know things they shouldn't. Have you seen the strange plants hanging outside their cottage? They're making potions. One rumour became another, each retelling another thing, adding on extra bits and pieces. Someone claimed they had seen strange lights near the cottage. Another insisted they heard voices in the woods after sunset. By the end of the week, no one could remember where the stories had begun, only that everyone seemed to believe them. The sisters carried on regardless. They continued gathering lavender, chamomile, rosemary, mint, the same herbs they had collected for years. Nothing had changed, except the way people looked at them. One afternoon, an elderly farmer arrived at the cottage. His face was pale. His hands trembled. "My grandson," he said quietly. "He's burning with fever." Without hesitation, the sisters gathered their baskets. They prepared cool cloths, herbal teas, simple remedies passed down through generations. For hours they remained behind the child. By morning, his fever had eased. The sisters quietly packed their baskets. As they stepped outside, the farmer thanked them with tears in his eyes. "You saved him." But someone had been watching. Later that day, the story reached the village. Only it was no longer the same story. They performed strange rituals. They were alone with the boy all night. They cast a spell. Truth had quietly disappeared, replaced by fear. The village changed. Doors closed earlier every evening. Conversations became whispers. Neighbours who had smiled and shared meals together now eyed one another with suspicion. The illness continued to spread, and every new death seemed to demand someone to blame. One evening, the sisters walked home through Grovely Wood. They noticed a ribbon tied around a nearby branch, bright red. "Well, who tied that there?" she asked. The third sister smiled. "Perhaps someone wishing for good luck." The eldest looked at the ribbon for a long moment. "I'm not so sure." The wind stirred gently through the branches. The ribbon, it fluttered, almost like a warning. The following Sunday, the church was full. People prayed harder than they had ever prayed before. They begged for the sickness to end. As the congregation slowly drifted outside, small groups gathered in the churchyard. No one spoke loudly, but certain words carried clearly through the cold afternoon air. Witchcraft, curses, the forest woman. One man shook his head. "We've all seen them wandering those woods," another replied quietly. "They know too much about herbs." An older woman hesitated. "They've never harmed anyone." "No," the man answered. "Then why does the illness keep spreading?" No one had an answer. Sometimes people just don't need proof, only fear. And fear was becoming more powerful every single day. That evening, The darkness settled over Grovely Wood. The sisters sat again beneath the great beech tree. The youngest broke the silence. "I wish things could go back to how they were." The eldest reached across and gently took her hand. "They will," but her voice lacked conviction. She wasn't trying to convince her sister. She was trying to convince herself. Far beyond the trees, lanterns began moving along the village road. 1, then 3, then 6. More lights appeared, more voices. Slowly, the crowd grew. The sisters watched in silence. None of them moved. None of them spoke, because somewhere deep inside, each one of them already knew. The people walking towards the cottage were no longer coming for medicine. They were coming for them. The lanterns moved slowly through the darkness. Their warm glow flickered between the trees, growing brighter with every passing moment. The sisters, they remained standing outside the cottage. No one tried to run. Where would they go? This was their home. The eldest stepped forward. "What has happened?" No one answered. The crowd simply continued walking. Faces they had known for years now looked at them with suspicion. Some refused to meet their eyes. Others stared with anger. A young mother clutched her baby child tightly. An elderly man lowered his head in shame. At the front of the crowd, a village elder finally spoke. "You've brought this sickness upon us." The younger sister looked around in disbelief. "What are you talking about? We've done nothing but help." Someone from the crowd shouted, "Liar." Another voice followed. "We've seen your potions." "They're medicines," the third sister pleaded. "Nothing more." But fear rarely listens to reason. Once the story takes hold, truth struggles to catch it. The sisters were surrounded, not by strangers, but by neighbours. People whose children they had comforted. People whose injuries they had treated. People who had once shared meals around the same table. The eldest looked at each face, one by one. She recognized every one of them. "I know you," she whispered. "You know us." For a moment, silence settled over the woodland. It seemed just for a heartbeat that someone might step forward, that might say, "This has gone too far." But sadly, no one did. The fear had become stronger than compassion. The villagers led the sisters deeper into Grovely Wood. The path became narrower. The trees closed in around them. Branches stretched across the sky, blocking out the last traces of evening light. Only the lanterns remained. Their glow danced across ambient, ancient bark and damp leaves beneath their feet. The younger sister began to cry quietly. "I'm frightened." The second sister slipped her hand into hers. "So am I." The eldest walked ahead, her shoulders straight, her breathing calm. She knew there would be no changing their minds now. The great beech tree appeared through the mist. Even then, it was already ancient. Its enormous roots gripped the earth like the hands of time itself. The villagers stopped. No one spoke. The wind moved softly through the branches above. According to the old legend, this was where the sisters met their end. No dramatic final battle, no supernatural curse. Only 4 innocent women, sometimes known as the Hansel sisters, caught in the grip of fear. The old stories say they were buried separately, far enough apart that if they truly were witches, their spirits would never find one another. Whether that happened exactly as the legend tells us, no one actually knows. History is a habit of losing the voices of ordinary people, especially women, especially those accused of things they never had the chance to defend. The years passed, then the decades, then the centuries. The little cottage disappeared. The villagers grew old. Children became grandparents. Their names faded into history. But the story, well, that refused to disappear. Parents whispered it to their children. Grandparents told it beside winter fires. Walkers spoke quietly about the old beech tree deep within the forest. Then something curious happens. Visitors began leaving ribbons. No one knows who tied the first one. Perhaps it was someone who believed the legend. Perhaps someone who simply felt moved by the place. Whatever the reason, others followed. 1 ribbon became 10. 10 became 50. Today, there are hundreds. Some carry wishes, some carry prayers, some simply remember. Stand beneath this great tree today, and you'll notice something extraordinary. People lower their voices. Even those who don't believe the legend often find themselves speaking in whispers, almost as though the forest asks for silence. I've stood beneath that tree myself, and while I can't tell you whether ghosts walk between those ancient branches, I can tell you something else. There is a feeling there, a stillness, a sense that this place has witnessed joy, sorrow, kindness, cruelty, and quietly carries every one of those memories. Perhaps that's why people returned. Not to ghost hunt, not to prove legends, but to remember, to pause, to reflect on what fear can do. When compassion is forgotten, this is what happens. So if you ever visit Grovely Wood, you'll probably find the witch's tree without too much difficulty. The ribbons will catch your eye long before you reach it. When you do, take a moment, listen. Not for voices, not for footsteps, just simply listen. To the wind moving through the branches, to the birds high above the canopy, to the quiet heartbeat of an ancient woodland. And if you feel moved to tie a ribbon, let it be a ribbon of remembrance. Not for the witches, not for the ghosts, but for 4 women, who, according to the old Wiltshire legend, may simply have just been kind. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey into Grovely Wood. If you did enjoy the story, please like this video, subscribe to Whispered Nightmares, and join me as we continue exploring Britain's forgotten legends, haunted places, and mysteries that still linger in the shadows. Until next time, sleep well, and if you ever find yourself walking beneath ancient trees of Grovely Wood, remember, sometimes the most haunted stories are not about monsters, they're about people.